too. This is one of our ash and oak folk workshops we've been doing all summer out of West Multnomah Soil and Water Conservation District. As a soil and water conservation district, we are a non-regulatory government agency, so we don't do any lawmaking or anything with laws, but we just help people with their soil and water, go to their yards and help them figure out how to make them better for the environment. I hope I said that in a good way. Today, I'm facilitating this. I'm Eleanor Green, our outreach and communications manager. We also have Cami Kern-Kurat, wow, I should have asked you how to pronounce your last name. So sorry. Our senior conservationist. We have Pavlina Slezak, our intern, and also James Tracy, our other intern, who've been working on this program all summer. So yeah, that's who you'll be seeing here today. Feel free to turn on your camera if you want to kind of be part of the conversation, or leave it off if that's more comfortable for you. We do have a question in the chat from us. Feel free to introduce yourselves. What brought you here today? What do you already know about this topic? And do you have an ash or oak tree? Oh, Pavlina put it in the chat again. That's great. So this issue is important. I'll give you the very basic version and then we'll get into this whole hour webinar. Emerald ash borer and Mediterranean oak borer are bugs that came to our region that are not from here, and they have an outsized impact on tree health compared to native bugs that also might nibble on some trees once in a while. So you can see on the left on the screen here, this is a neighborhood where you can see the difference before and after the emerald ash borer came along. Obviously, trees are very important for human health and habitat and feeling good and having shade, and they're also very important for other plants and for other creatures in the environment. So losing a lot of trees is pretty devastating. And then you see on the right an oak tree that's been diagnosed with having the Mediterranean oak borer infestation. So you can see that right side on the bottom picture is dying. So we're going to talk about, this gets into what we're going to do today. We're going to be talking about how to identify an oak and an ash tree, because that's really the first step. Understand the importance of those trees and the threats to them posed by the invasive beetles, emerald ash borer and Mediterranean oak borer. Recognize the signs of tree stress and infestation, and that is to help slow the spread. So these are beetles that have made a very big impact already, especially emerald ash borer in our country on the east and Midwest. But what can we do now that it's in our region to slow that spread? And when it comes to slowing the spread, how monitoring tree health, mapping trees, and reporting concerns can also be part of what you guys do to hopefully help trees in our region. And with that, I will pass it to Pavlina. Oh, I should also say, we do have a kind of a tight schedule as far as questions. As the questions come up, feel free to put them in the chat and we will get to them at the end. We have a schedule that takes us till about 5:50, and then we have 10 minutes for questions, and we can even stay on until about 6:30 if anybody has even more questions. And with that, I'll pass it to Pavlina.
Great. So first we'll talk about Oregon ash and the invasive insect that is threatening the species. The Latin name is Fraxinus latifolia. And if you could go to the next slide, please. Can you move to the next slide, Eleanor? Thank you. So Oregon ash is a significant native tree species in Western Oregon, primarily because it grows well in poorly drained, clayey, and seasonally flooded soils. So pretty wet areas where a lot of other tree species don't grow or don't grow well. So it provides valuable riparian, so like stream and riverside habitat, and also forested wetland habitat. Because it's often near streams, it is cooling or shading those streams, thus reducing the water temperatures and creating good habitat for fish species. And it's also stabilizing stream banks with its roots and preventing erosion, while also providing habitat and food for numerous wildlife species. So we can see some images of forested wetlands dominated by Oregon ash from a bird's eye view up in the right corner. And then we have kind of like from a viewpoint in the background. And young ash trees also are shade tolerant, so they can grow in like a mixed species forest until they are taller and then they can access the sunlight. Next slide. Okay, so Oregon ash likes wet areas and it likes lowlands. So it can grow in areas up to 3,000 feet in elevation. And you can see it's primarily in the Willamette Valley in Oregon. So in this map, the darkest red areas show the highest risk for emerald ash borer. You can see that's really right around Portland and in the Willamette Valley. Next slide. And zooming in a bit more to Portland, on the left, we have a map showing where ash is located as modeled by Oregon Department of Forestry. It's a little difficult to see, but those dark green areas are where ash is dominating the canopy. And you can see it's kind of like stream side, yep, in kind of west of the West Hills. And then we also have a lot of ash around Savi's Island. And on the right side, we have a map from City of Portland. So this is showing not just Oregon ash, but all ash trees that they have mapped in city limits. So in the genus Fraxinus. So all of these trees are threatened by emerald ash borer. We're focusing on the native ash species today, but just to give you a glimpse of, there's a lot of ash trees that are, street trees or trees on private property in the city of Portland that are also threatened by emerald ash borer. I think the count is around 95,000 ash trees. If you want to go to the next slide. Okay, so now we're going to focus on some identification for Oregon ash. So when you're standing far away, generally ash is kind of lighter green in color and can have a taller columnar shape. When it's just growing by itself, it can kind of spread out and do different shapes. But on the left, we have a nice picture here that's ash in front. And right behind it is an Oregon white oak, which you can see is much rounder and has darker leaves. So this is a nice comparison of the two species we're talking about. And the older trees can also have diamond-shaped furrows in the bark, which you see on the right side here. But younger trees can have pretty variable appearances for their bark. Next slide. Okay. Moving closer to the leaves. The leaves of Oregon ash trees are, I'm going to throw out some botany terms here if they're useful for folks. They're pinnately compound and opposite. And to be technical here, everything in this large dark blue circle is a leaf. And then all of the little things that look like leaves are actually leaflets. So that's if you're interested in that. But each leaf for an Oregon ash is comprised of 5 to 7 leaflets. And those leaflets are opposite of each other, so directly across. And then there's one at the top. The shape of the leaflets can be varied. Sometimes they're like a little pointier at the tip. Sometimes they're more rounded. But this is the general shape of the leaf. And the female trees also have these single-winged seed pods. So fun fact, Oregon ash trees are dioecious, meaning that there's separate male and female trees. So not all the trees are going to have these seed pods. Next slide. Okay, and Oregon ash trees lose their leaves in the fall, so they're deciduous. And when they don't have leaves, the best way to ID them is to look at the branches. So they have an opposite branching structure, so directly across from each other, not alternating. And this creates kind of a pitchfork shape in the branches. If you look closer at the twigs, then you'll notice that there's kind of shield-shaped leaf scars on the twigs, and those are also directly opposite of each other. So always look for opposite on an ash. And next slide.
Passing it to Cami.
Hello, everyone. I'm glad to have you here. I'm going to be talking to you about how the emerald ash borer is threatening our wonderful Oregon ash that Evelina just introduced you to. So emerald ash borer is the most destructive tree pest in the United States. It started its entry into the US on the East Coast, and it's killed about 100 million trees. It's very destructive. Trees generally do not survive an infestation of emerald ash borer. Because the emerald ash borer had been spreading across the country, we were anticipating it coming to Oregon. And so the Portland metro area and the state got together and came up with a sort of a preparedness plan. And so when it did show up in Forest Grove in 2022, we were fairly well prepared. We have the benefit of having experienced that infestation after the East Coast and the Midwest had a lot of years of experience trying to deal with it. So we benefited from their experience and really launched an aggressive campaign right away to address it. But I'll get to that in a minute. We thought we might have had at least a few years before the insect spread from Forest Grove, Washington County into Portland. It had been found further south of Portland about a year ago, and then just in the last few weeks, it was identified in Portland on the east side. And so far, it's fairly isolated as far as we know. We haven't been able to find many other indications of emerald ash borer in Portland around the tree that was affected, but it's likely just hiding up in the canopy, and we haven't seen it yet. They are out and about flying as adults. Starting in the spring, they emerge from the tree, and we can see them flying around, and they get attracted to our traps that we put out that helps us know if they're here. And then those adults that are flying around will lay eggs in the crevices of the bark, and then those eggs will turn into larvae, and they burrow into the tree and make these D-shaped holes when that larva inside turns into an adult, and it will come out the following spring and make this D-shaped exit hole. And you can see a picture of the emerald ash borer in the penny just to get a sense of how big it is. It's pretty small. It's about a ½ inch long, and those exit holes that look like little D-shaped tunnels are about a ½ inch. So pretty small. And as I mentioned, those larvae are burrowing into the wood, and in the process, they're cutting off the flow of nutrients and water to the tree. And that's what will kill the tree once there's enough insects in the tree over a couple of years, boring through and eating the wood, essentially. And on the right of this slide is another picture that we showed earlier, but this is a photo of sort of a ground zero for emerald ash borer in Oregon, out in Forest Grove. This was a street close to a school where it was first found, and all the ash trees on that street, all the street trees on that street were ash, and unfortunately they were all infested. So it's a lesson to why we want to diversify our tree species, both in natural areas and in non-natural areas, urban settings. Next slide, please. So signs and symptoms of emerald ash borer. The most important thing you're going to want to look for is looking at the canopy of the ash tree. Hopefully you've learned how to recognize an ash tree if you didn't know that already. If you are confused, because there are some lookalikes out there, there's lots of resources we have on our website and lots of other resources on some of the state websites. We will point you to some of those later in an email and on our website. But you mostly want to be looking at the crown, the top of the tree, and how the foliage is doing up there. Do you see a big area of no leaves, what looks like dead branches? And that's sort of a telltale sign of one of these invasive pests. And I'll show you a picture later of an oak that has some dieback, but it's not from one of these invasive pests, to get a sense of how that looks different. One thing that's interesting that ash does a lot of is called epicormic branching. So that image on the lower left is its response when it's basically being, deprived of all its nutrients. And in a sense, the tree knows it's going to die. And this is its last gasp for life, to try and create foliage somewhere else on the tree so it can photosynthesize and, get nutrients. Another thing that you will see, it's helpful to have binoculars. If you happen to see a tree like that top left corner where you see dieback, get out some binoculars if you have them, or if you have keen eyes, just look carefully. The woodpeckers are very attracted to those larvae that are in the wood. It's great food for them. So you'll see that they've flecked away some of the outer bark and it looks lighter in color. So that's called woodpecker flecking or blonding. And if you're looking for it, you may notice that. And that's one more clue that you might have emerald ash borer. And then, as I mentioned earlier, you've got these holes, those ones at the bottom. I'm actually having a hard time seeing the bottom of the screen myself right now. But I think that, does it say we have some other woodpecker holes down there on the bottom?
Yeah, under the blonding is the woodpecker holes.
Okay. Yeah, my image is cut off for some reason. And then again, top right, those are those D-shaped exit holes. Hard to see, but if you see a dying canopy or you see epicormic shoots like that, kind of very odd at the base of the tree, go look more closely. Another thing that's sometimes characteristic is what's called bark splitting. So that far right picture in the middle, usually they'll see that, like if you're looking at the trunk of the tree, it's going to go vertical. So from top to bottom, and that's because the tree is stressed. If it was, basically killed in that area, it's kind of creating it's trying to heal around that wound, and you'll see that cracking. And, if you see some suspicious signs, like some of these other images on the slide, you can even take, a knife or a special tool and peel back some of the bark, or sometimes you can even see within that crack that there's these S-shaped galleries. And that's the larva kind of, worming its way in and out of the wood, eating as it goes. And so that's sort of a telltale sign of emerald ash borer. So if you see D-shaped exit holes, woodpecker flecking, bark cracks, epicormic shoots, or canopy dieback, look closer. And we'll tell you more about what to do with that information later. Next slide, please. So EAB detections in Oregon, our shorthand for emerald ash borer is EAB. So we'll probably be saying EAB because we're accustomed to that. So as you can see on the left is a map of the detections that were the infested trees that were found in 2022 and 2023. They were pretty much contained within the Forest Grove area out in Washington County. But then unfortunately, in the next couple of years, there was a new infestation discovered down near Woodburn. And so that's a whole nother population. At first, the thought was maybe that they had that EAB had traveled from the original infestation to this new infestation, but based on the level of damage on the ash trees and the extent of that infestation, that one might actually predate the Forest Grove infestation, and just nobody was looking carefully enough for it. Partly because some of the landowners with the trees that were affected didn't know they were ash trees and didn't know there was a problem with ash trees. Next slide.
One quick thing here, Cami. It says 2004 to current, but I think it's supposed to say 2024 to current on the bottom.
Yes, thank you.
Go ahead.
So what are we doing about EAB? And some of these things are going to overlap with what you can do about EAB, and I'll address some of that in the next slide as well. There's a very robust task force that formed right away when we discovered emerald ash borer in Washington County. And that is made up of the Oregon Department of Forestry, the Oregon Department of Agriculture. We've had some really good federal partners that are currently furloughed, but we're hoping they'll be back. We have a lot of the local soil and water conservation districts that have relationships with the landowners, so that's why we're involved. And municipalities and City of Portland, so many groups. In some cases, the county, the parks people, natural area managers, Metro. So lots of people involved in trying to address this major threat. And then one of the things that we're doing is surveying, so looking for those distressed trees, and we have several means of doing that. We're enlisting the public to help us with that. Hopefully that's accomplish some of that today with your being here. And then we've got different tools for surveying. We have some apps. We're going to encourage you to use iNaturalist to help survey. There's the Oregon Invasive Species Hotline, which we'll talk about if you find concerning trees out there that you can use to report. And then we have our traps. And so those are tools that we have both on the left side of the slide here. We have green, what are called funnel traps, where the insects are attracted to those green funnels, and then they get funneled down to a container at the bottom where they're collected in antifreeze. And then we go out and collect them and look for EAB. And then below that is what we call a purple prism trap. That's a sticky trap. And we've shifted to more of those traps this year because they require less maintenance. So it's less workload for us. So we appreciate that. So that's been an important part of discovering where the emerald ash borer are. This year, there were 9 new positive identifications because of the traps that have been put out by over 300 different partner groups, including us. So that's been a really important collaborative effort. As far as slowing ash mortality, one of the most important things that all of us can do is not spread firewood. It is the major cause of its spread. We think in Forest Grove, it probably showed up there because someone had firewood in their backyard nearby the school. It jumped from the East Coast and the Midwest to Colorado through firewood. And, we can only speculate that it showed up in Portland and East County through firewood because there's not really any other EAB immediately around it. So Oregon Department of Forestry advises do not burn firewood more than 10 miles from its source. So burn it where you buy it where you burn it. So if you go camping, try to buy it locally. Don't take your firewood with you to Southern Oregon or Northern Washington. Burn it where it's coming from. So another strategy that's been used effectively in Oregon and the Portland metro area is what are called trap trees. So that's a tree that is likely to be killed by emerald ash borer because there's the invasive insect all around it. We know it's probably going to die anyway. So we girdle it, which basically means you remove the bark, a big strip of the bark around the middle of the tree. And then that is essentially doing what the emerald ash borer would have done, which is cutting off the nutrients in the water of that flow of that tree, and it's going to die. And then it's sending out stress hormones as it's dying that attract the emerald ash borer. So we're drawing in those emerald ash borer insects that are in the area so that we can basically house them in that tree and then take down that tree and, effectively get rid of all of those insects before they spread to other trees. And then in tandem with that strategy is treating with a very targeted insecticide that's proven very effective. Treat the trees around it, the other ash trees that you want to protect. And so even though you've drawn in that insect, you have protected the trees around it. So that top right photo in the slide shows what's called trunk injection of the insecticide that's proven effective with emerald ash borer. It's very targeted. It's not known to affect other beneficial insects. It's not causing the leaves to become toxic to other insects that might feed on them. So it's a really great tool. The insecticide's injected directly into the tree, and it'll protect the tree for 2 to 3 years. And I know somebody in the chat was asking about that.
Yeah, the top right picture here.
Yeah, the
Oh,
one where
I
you
was
see
gonna
the
say
person's
maybe
hand with the blue sleeve.
a little bit over on your time on this section.
Okay,
If you can,
okay,
sorry, talk a little, maybe a little less on the other topics, and we can get to
okay.
the injection questions at the end. But yes, it is
Yes,
top
let's do
right.
that. So there's a picture of a parasitic wasp. They're really, really teeny. They've been introduced to help control the emerald ash borer. They're very small. They don't harm humans. They're not scary. They're very targeted on emerald ash borer, and that's been effective in slowing down the spread. And we've had success in finding them actually feeding on emerald ash borer out in Washington County. And then if you do have an infested tree, we treat it in a special way so that the insect doesn't get spread. And then we're also doing education and outreach, such as this workshop, and planning for alternative species because the ash may not be a good option going into the future. Next slide. So this is a little bit of a reinforcement of what I just talked about. This light blue area on this map is called the management zone for emerald ash borer. Each of those pink dots is where there's an active infestation right now. Each of those dots is buffered with a dark blue circle, and then each of those blue circles is buffered with a light blue circle. So our conservation district, West Multnomah, is completely within that management zone. So for us, we would look to that right column, EAB alert, and some of the things that, management recommendations for us are, again, don't move firewood, inventory the trees, survey trees to see if you see signs of infestation, remove, replace trees if necessary, treat with insecticide if you would like and you have the means, and continue doing the trapping to see where it's spreading. Next slide, please.
And now we're passing it off to James to talk about Oregon oak.
Hi everyone, I'm James. I'm going to talk about the Oregon white oak. You can move on to the next slide. So why is the Oregon white oak so important? This is our only native oak species here in the Willamette Valley and throughout much of the Pacific Northwest. Once established, these trees are incredibly resilient. They have really deep tap roots and strong lateral roots, which makes them drought tolerant and wind resistant, and they can live well over 400 years. However, they are a very slow growing species and they require a lot of light and open space to reach that mature point where they're very resilient. They're also a keystone species here in the Northwest. They're keystone species to the very endangered white oak savanna and oak woodland habitats, which once covered a majority of the Willamette Valley. These oak savannas support an incredible abundance of other species, and they actually have the highest potential for biodiversity than any other habitat in the Pacific Northwest. The white oak itself is also a very important first food for indigenous tribes, producing a large number of acorns each year. And then the oak savanna's ecosystems also provide an abundance of other foods and resources. The oak savanna habitat was maintained by regular burning practices practiced by indigenous people in this region, which made both of the tree and the landscapes fire adapted. However, since settlers arrived and introduced industrial agriculture and banned burning practices, oak savanna habitats have disappeared significantly. Next slide. So this is a little map showing the distribution of oak savanna habitat. So since settler colonization, we've lost over 90% of this native oak habitat. So the map on the left is a distribution of oak savanna habitat and oak woodland around 1850. And then on the right is the distribution, the more current distribution as of 2004. So you can see that yellow and brown really is mostly disappeared at this point. And because of this loss of habitat and the suppression of fire, our native white oaks are more stressed than ever and susceptible to infestation and disease. And so the next slide. This is the current distribution of white oaks in the greater Portland area. So maybe you can see where these trees might be in relation to where you live. But in case you don't have a map on you and you want to know if your local tree is an Oregon white oak, I'll give you a little guide on how to ID white oak. Next slide. So since oak trees like a lot of light, they are happiest growing in big open spaces and often grow a large, broad crown. It might resemble the shape of a mushroom, but really large. They'll also have these large crooked branches. Um, but within forested stands, they won't have so much of a wide crown. The younger trees tend to be more narrow, and then the older, more mature trees that grow in these forested stands might have kind of a smaller crown that's higher up in the canopy in order to capture as much light as possible. But they'll all kind of have that like crooked branch structure. The mature oaks will also have this chunky bark pattern that you can see on the right picture there. Kind of splits into these more rectangular shaped blocks. And it's kind of like this light gray color. Next slide. So white oaks are going to be most identifiable by their leaves. They're often a darker green with a waxy surface, and they have these rounded lobes. This leaf shape is most often confused with the English oak, which is a common street tree here in Portland. Those will also have those like rounded lobes, but the white oak will kind of have these deeper grooves in the lobes, and the English oak will be a little bit more shallow. Um, Kind of hard to tell the difference sometimes. So the main difference you want to look for is in the length of the leaf stem, which is called the petiole. You can see them circled on the bottom left there. The Oregon white oak is going to have kind of a short to medium length leaf stem, but it will be visible. And then the English oak really has no or almost no stem and kind of is attached directly to the branch. And then lastly, all the oak species will produce these lovely little acorns. White oak produces a pretty small round acorn and it won't have any stem, so the acorn itself, the cap will be directly attached to the branch. Um, and that is how to ID Oregon white oak. I will say before we move on to the oak borer, these acorns, while they're a first food, they're very rich in tannins, which will upset your stomach, so they have to be processed before eating. So don't eat them right off the tree. But I'll pass it back to Cami to talk about the Mediterranean oak borer.
We are still a little bit um, uh, tight on time, but James helped us a little bit on that. But go ahead, Cami.
I'm going to talk to you about the Mediterranean oak borer, which is sort of an analog to the emerald ash borer. It kind of causes some of the same effects on our precious Oregon oak tree. As James, indicated, it's an incredibly valuable native tree. It's near and dear to our hearts and our ecosystems. And, it's been one of the trees that we've really put a lot of stock into for being resilient and be able to potentially survive harsh conditions of climate change. So we want to do everything we can to keep our Oregon oak on the landscape. But the Mediterranean oak borer is an even smaller wood boring beetle than the emerald ash borer. So it's really teeny, hard to identify, really requires an entomologist. And you can see relative to the size of like a lead pencil point, it's about the same size as that, so very small. It actually, even though it bores into the wood, it's actually introducing a fungus into the tunnels that it makes, and that's what's actually the food for the larva, the young insects. And so it's actually the fungus that ends up killing the tree, not the tunnels themselves. It seems to affect all oak species, native and non. So, if there's a lot of, East Coast red oak and things like that on the landscape, street trees, yard trees, and those are also affected by emerald ash borer. It is native to Europe and Northern Africa and Western Asia. So like Turkey, Iran, Russia, those parts of Eurasia. It was first identified in California wine country, Sonoma and Napa Valley in 2019. Actually, The thinking is that it was probably there since at least 2010. It's just it wasn't really reported, and there weren't the heavy infestations observed until 2019. And the state has decided it's too well established to eradicate in Central California, unfortunately. And one thing that James alluded to in terms of stressed oaks is that unlike emerald ash borer, which seems to be fairly indiscriminate of going after healthy trees versus unhealthy trees, the Oregon oak, the MOB, the Mediterranean oak borer, seems to have a preference or be drawn to unhealthy trees, stress trees. So one more reason to not stress our oak trees if possible. Next slide, please. So again, similar to the Oregon ash, its invasive wood boring beetle has the same effect. You'll see that canopy die back. Usually see a whole section of the crown dying back. You might see one large branch dying back, and then as the years progress, you'll see more and more of the crown die back. If you start to see any of that, again, approach the tree, get closer. There's something called frass. It's basically like sawdust that the insects, produce when they're boring through the tree. So sometimes you'll see like a little bit of what looks like sawdust in the lichen that's on the bark of the tree, or if there's some spider webs on the bark of the tree, you'll see that. I saw that on the infected trees in Wilsonville. So that's a really good indicator. If you get, if you have really keen eyes, you might get to go up close and see these teeny tiny holes and a little teeny tiny like brown body sticking out. But that's pretty challenging. So again, the main thing to look for is that affected canopy. And were you to cut open the bark or have some kind of split where you could see the damage they're doing to the wood, they make very different galleries inside than the emerald ash borer does. So rather than those S-shaped curves, they have these sort of radiating dark curves that almost look, maybe like veins or something like that. Next slide, please. And so here's where Mediterranean oak borer has shown up in Oregon. It was in California, as I mentioned, and our thinking was that it would come up from California and sort of start to invade from California into Southern Oregon, but it actually showed up independently in the greater Portland area in Wilsonville, as I mentioned. One of the theories about how it got here is that there's, just like in California, Wilsonville has some wine production, and wine barrels are often made of oak from Europe. And so when the genetics were done on the Mediterranean oak borer that was found here, its origins were Germany. So the nursery trade, again, firewood and any kind of untreated wood product can be a source of these devastating pests. It was first found in a trap in Troutdale in Multnomah County back in 2018. Nobody made a fuss about it because it was just one beetle in a trap. It hadn't done damage. The state folks thought it was just a one-off. But then in 2022, there was actually an affected tree, and then one in Wilsonville, and that's sort of the epicenter of where the trees are being infected. And one of the theories is that because there's been a lot of development in Wilsonville, a lot of construction, a lot of disturbance, a lot of new impervious surface, pavement over roots of trees, construction around them, more heat island effect from all the urbanization. That's been really hard on those trees and seems to have drawn the Mediterranean oak borer to them. And then in that bar graph on the left, you can see the affected trees. Some of them have been removed, some of them have just shown signs of distress, and some of them they've actually found the insect. And then you can see on the map there that the pink diamonds are the ones where Mediterranean oak borer has definitely been found to be present. Okay, next slide, please. So what we're doing about the Mediterranean oak borer, and again, some of this is things you can do if you have oak trees or you have a concern and want to be involved in, community surveying, is you can do some of that surveying and monitoring. We've been using traps again to see where they're located out there on the landscape. On the right, you can see that black funnel trap, similar to that green funnel trap we used for the emerald ash borer, that if the Mediterranean oak borer is in the area, it may be drawn to that trap, and then we'll find it in the liquid in the bottom. Another important thing you can do is learn what is Mediterranean oak borer impact and what's not. And so I mentioned this earlier, but if you look at that image on the left, the top image is Mediterranean oak borer, just like those ash trees. You see a whole section of canopy dying off. But that photo on the bottom that just has little scattered patches of brown, that's just squirrel damage or some other native pest that's not as destructive. You know, it's evolved with our native trees, and it's just sort of like, you know, having a scratch, you'll get over it. But when you see whole sections of the tree dying, that's when you really want to, you know, pay attention. So obviously we're doing education, trying to minimize stress on those trees. Don't park under your oak tree, you know, don't pave over your roots, things like that. There are management guidelines that are being developed if you have an oak tree and you want to decide what to do about that. So there's great resources out there. One that's floating around right now is maybe proactively pruning. If you have an oak limb that looks like it might come down in a storm, you could proactively prune it so you don't have like a break that's maybe more of a messy wound that could attract those insects in. There are some trials using herbicide and fungicide. It's more complicated with the Mediterranean oak borer because of the fungus aspect. And so you have to treat both the insect and the fungus, and that's a very hard, perfect formula to come up with. But we are compiling a list of certified arborists trained primarily in treating the emerald ash borer, but at least one of the local arborists is trying some of these treatments on Oregon oak. Next slide, please. So what can you do? You've already checked the first box. You can learn to recognize oak and ash. You can map Oregon oak and ash on iNaturalist. Petalina is going to speak briefly about that. That'll help us know where those trees are on the landscape, in addition to the ones we already know about. You can monitor the health of Oregon oak and Oregon ash near you. Very much appreciate that. We need as many eyes out there on the ground. You can ask your community members to do the same, so please go spread the word. Care for your oak and ash trees. Again, just try not to stress them. You might want to actually give them a couple deep waters in the summer, but don't overwater them, particularly if it's an oak. And, you know, the most important message for everyone is don't move firewood and ask for help if you need it. We are here to support you. Next slide.
Thanks, Cami. Also report your infestations. I think it sounds like yours is covered up. I hope it's not covered up for other attendees, but reporting infestations is also something we're going to cover after Pavlina talks about iNaturalist.
Great. So it seems like folks were somewhat split on if they've used iNaturalist before or not, but it's a phone and desktop application where you can make observations of any species you see. And we would really like you to do that for oaks and ashes that you find in your neighborhood if you're going on a hike, and whether or not they're healthy or they look like they might have signs of infestations. It's just helpful us to know where these trees are and the condition of them. So we have two projects on iNaturalist, one for Oregon ash, one for Oregon white oak. And the first step is to join those projects after you've downloaded the application. So we have a step-by-step guide for downloading the app and making an observation, which we sent out to everyone at the beginning. We're happy to send it again. And if folks want to stay after the presentation, I'm happy to do more of a screen share demo for making an observation, or you can email us if you're having any issues with that. But very briefly, I will share my screen and just show you guys what the project looks like. Alrighty. So can folks see my screen okay? Oh, not yet. Okay.
Not yet.
Now.
I can now.
Okay. Great. So I'm logged into my iNaturalist account, and the first thing you want to do is check out one of our projects. We can do, it's called Oregon Oaks of the Willamette Valley. And you can just find that by searching and going to the page. Here you'll have an option to join it. I'm already a part of it. And I would recommend before you make an observation, check out observations that other people have done, especially the ones that say RG or research grade. Those have been like the most verified. We can look at an observation here. One that I think is a good example of what you want to do is you want to take a lot of photos, not just one. So get a close-up of the leaves, or a more zoomed out photo of the tree. If there's any signs of damage or infestation, get that as well. Any like fruits or flowers is very helpful. Okay. And one thing I want to clarify is once you make an observation, you should automatically, or the observation will automatically be added to the project if it meets the project requirements. So this is a point of confusion. People try to sometimes tag the project, say, okay, put my observation in the Oregon Oak project, and they don't have an option for that because it's automatic, okay? So I can show you, here's the project requirements for the Oregon Oak. So basically, it's gotta be the species, Oregon white oak. Your observation needs to be in Oregon or Washington, and those are basically the main requirements. So it should automatically get uploaded. And if you have questions about that, please contact us. And yeah, that is my quick demo.
I think I want to share my screen again. We wanted to say as well to go back to the same trees. Do you want to say more about that, or you want me to just keep going?
Yeah, thanks for the reminder. So yes, once you have observed a tree, it would be nice to check on it maybe once or twice a year. You can add notes to your observation. And yeah, just see if like it was infested, if like it's looking like it's doing worse, or if it was healthy and now there's signs of infestation. That is helpful for us to know. So yeah.
Great, thank you. I think I must be on this last slide here. So if you suspect EAB or MOB, because you see those dying canopies, you see the frass, that little sawdust part on an oak, or you see the little D-shaped exit holes, you don't have to see all of the symptoms, but if you are concerned, you can take the same pictures that you upload to iNaturalist and upload them to the Oregon Invasive Species, or an Oregon Invasives hotline, which is oregoninvasiveshotline.org. They like a lot of pictures too, and they will send your reports to people like Cami or whoever is relevant to the location that you're reporting, and or even up to Oregon Department of Agriculture or Forestry, like they go out to real people who go and say, okay, this is concerning. They might say, oh, this is a squirrel situation, we're not concerned, or they'll come out to look at the tree. So it's really good to have a really good location, as close as and as many pictures as you can if you're concerned. And if you are wrong, it's not a big deal. So don't feel like dumb or you shouldn't upload or something like that. Yeah, so you'll be contacted if follow-up is needed. And that's how things are, like, that is how infestations are found out about, because of people doing that. So it's very important. Yeah, so I'm gonna share a bunch of I'm gonna email you a bunch of links and things so you can learn more. All the documents we've made for these kind of workshops, but I'd love to get you to questions, and we're on perfect time, which is great. I know that there was one question earlier about the inoculating an ash tree. They asked, I want to inoculate it. Is that something I can do? Is it expensive?
So I can answer that. The question is yes and yes, depending on your perspective. It can be about $200 to $300 to treat an individual tree. If there's like a number of trees in close proximity, you know, you can get more economy of scale per tree. But you know, there's that mobilization cost for the arborists. But as I said earlier, we are compiling a list of arborists that are offering this treatment. It's definitely an option with Oregon ash. You know, if you have that one prize ash tree in your yard, or, you know, in your whatever it is on your property, and you really want to protect it, and you have the money to invest, then that's definitely an option. And we definitely want some of those ash on the landscape to be preserved. So you know, the more people that are able to do that, the better. But you know, we recognize that that isn't viable for everyone. But yeah, please do reach out if you want the name of some arborists.
Great. Thanks for sharing that link as well, James. That is probably what I'm going to send you tomorrow. So that has all the steps of like how to care for your tree, like not parking under it, like Cami said. All the stuff we talked about is in there, and more like look-alike bug forms, and there's a great dashboard from the state. Any other questions?
I mean, I think if anybody wants to put in more questions, we encourage that. There was that other question about, did MOB ride in on a cargo load of oak from out of country for wine barrels? I think that John nailed it on the head there. I mean, that's the theory. I don't know if we have 100% proof, but yeah, I mean, ideally the wood would be treated before it comes to the country. There's actually international rules about that, but not sure how that slipped through the cracks. Maybe for wine barrels, because yeah, I mean, they can be heat treated, so they don't have to be chemically treated, but perhaps that didn't happen. But that's the hypothesis for now of how it got here. And for ash, it's firewood.
I've got a question. It's about the app, iNaturalist app. I've got the app and I tested it today. I'm not, I don't know that I didn't get to where I was going to add it. Just I wasn't logged into a project and blah, blah, blah. So my question is, I was also on the website, iNaturalist website. I saw you were there looking at projects. So my question is, if I took a photo that was, let's say the photo is outside of the iNaturalist app, I just happen to take a picture of something and I have it on my phone and it's geocoded, could I go to the web and just relate to iNaturalist through the web, or do I have to use the app?
You need to input the location into the app when you're making the observation. So I usually do it on my phone and it'll automatically grab the location. I haven't tested it out like through like the desktop like you're saying. But I think it's just inputting coordinates, which you can go into the photo that you took and grab, like copy paste the coordinates and then put it into either like desktop iNaturalist or phone iNaturalist. So yes, you need like the coordinates in iNaturalist. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess I thought maybe it might be easier to be sitting at my desk and, do it, working on it and looking at other research grade photos and blah, blah, blah. And then just uploading an observation while I'm on that instead of fumbling around with the iPhone. But I just need to do a few, is there a way where you can just be in a sandbox project and, go take a picture of what's this plant here and say, identify it and then upload it or not? Can I have my own project that I could just test with before I try to connect to your two projects?
You could definitely create your own project on iNaturalist and you can upload an observation, and if you did it wrong or you don't like it, you can always edit it or delete it too.
Right.
And yeah, so I would say don't worry about that too much. And
Okay.
to answer your
Thank you.
previous question, you can definitely do everything on the desktop. You can just take photos on your phone or whatever and do it later. That's fine. You just will need to like have the location written down somewhere or like coordinates copied and pasted. Yeah, and if you have more questions about that, I'm happy to talk after or like do some emailing back and forth about that.
Thank you.
I would also add just one thing that I've learned about iNaturalist since I also downloaded it for this back in June. Yeah, you can just put an observation in, like you could just take a picture of a flower outside your house and make like pretend that it's an ash tree and just like write about what you see. Like this flower looks really healthy and you know, it's sunny and it's October and all of this and like it can just live on your profile and it doesn't necessarily go to a project. But then there are also other projects out there on iNaturalist, so they automatically pull from observations whether or not you actually joined the project or not. So you might take a picture of a maple tree, and maybe there's a maple project out there that's like trying to track maple trees, and that's not our project, but that's fine. You can take a picture of a maple tree, and then it'll get kind of linked to that project so those people can see. So it's a very like community science kind of app and website. So that's kind of cool. And yeah, like Pavlina said, you don't have to really worry about messing up because it's just kind of a journal for plants. Cool. Emma, did you want to
Citizen
answer the
scientist
question?
here.
Yeah.
Hi, yeah. First of all, James, hi. It's fun to see you outside of class because we have class together. Anyway, I was curious about the Mediterranean ash borer fungus thing. Like, does that just like how does that get in the insect to begin with? Which I'm just curious. It's not like a
Yeah, that's an interesting question. You know, I'm not sure I know the answer to that. There's actually several different species of fungus, and so that's one of the reasons it's particularly challenging to figure out what fungicide to use because like some of the fungal species that the California Mediterranean oak borer is vectoring are different than the fungal species that we've identified here. So, so there's that. And then as far as how they're carrying it around, I'm not sure actually if they're just carrying it on their body, if they're carrying it on their gut. I don't know if it's like in their, you know, the equivalent of saliva. That's a good question. I mean, I could certainly ask like the state entomologist if you want to know more about that, because that is an interesting question. But it's also, you know, all of these species are very new to us here in the US and on the West Coast. I mean, we are the sort of the first infestation in North America, and the Americas really, I think at all is California and Oregon. So we're really still learning a lot. Most of what we know is from the native range. So really good question. I don't completely know the answer, but I would be happy to look into it because that's a very interesting question.
My
But I think they're
guess,
bringing it with them essentially.
yes, my guess is it's in their digestive tract. It lives there all the time in their gut.
Yeah.
It's excreted either end.
thank you.
Looks like our urban conservationist Ariana is also in this webinar, and in the chat she said MOB has specialized chambers in their head that harbor the fungus. So
There you go.
isn't that special?
You just never know. But yeah, they're
Um,
definitely bringing
thanks
it
for
with
that,
them.
Ariana.
There you go. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Don't be shy. Any question?
Okay.
It's a good question. Eleanor, are we offering any prizes for naturalist observations?
No, we're not. We did for previous workshops over the summer. My eye just started really watering, so I don't know what that's about, but yeah, we don't have any prizes right now. But we'd love it if you did some iNaturalist observations. People that attended our workshops earlier in the summer have tracked about over 60 ash trees and over 70 oak trees. And we'd love if you went back to the same tree every year for sure. And now I'm going
Yeah.
to.
So no physical prize, but you have the reward of knowing you're contributing to community science and helping the broader community get on top of this challenge.
Dan, yes, this program is being recorded and it will be shared. We'll post it on YouTube and then send it out to everyone. So keep an eye out for that. Probably won't be first thing tomorrow, but yeah, it will be coming soon. Okay, I feel like things are trickling down, so thank you all for coming. If anyone does want to just stay on and pick our brains a little more, we won't click exit immediately, but feel free to get to your dinner, whatever else is happening for you this evening. Thanks all for coming.